Hitler's magic. As the border science par excellence, parapsychology experienced a renaissance in the Weimar Republic. No wonder that Hitler apparently read Schertl's parapsychological tome, Magic, which explained how to manipulate people in achieving power. In his reading of Schertl, Hitler seized immediately on one of the central tenets of parapsychology: the power of the will in appealing to the collective unconscious. The magician did not seek the support of a people, folk, whose good he would have to serve, Hitler underscored, but in order to garner power, an enlargement of his eye sphere. Should people not seem reactive enough, should they lose faith in their leader, Schertl added, the magician had every right to abandon them as Christ abandoned the Jews. Practicing magic required getting in touch with what modern man considered irrational by invoking one's intuition, which facilitates a divinization of the body. This hallucinatory suggestive process was fostered in ancient times through gods and concrete ceremonies, a whole cult with its temples and underground vaults, his idols, his sacred groves, gardens, lakes, and mountains, his whole magic pomp and solemn ritual. Hitler generated the same energies by shifting his venue from Munich beer halls to massive rallies, ceremonies, and parades. Hitler's reading of Schertl anticipates the Nazi approach to propaganda often attributed to by Goebbels. If you repeat a lie 1,000 times, people are bound to start believing it. All reality is only phantoms, Hitler noted, even if the reality of this demon image is a deception to dismiss. False images are necessary for the recognition of truth. There was, in fact, no fundamental difference between fantastical perceptions, imaginations, and objective observations. Imagination and observation are to the same extent products of the cosmic dynamic and of inner bodily forces, and as such, real, provided that the notion of reality still has any meaning at all, Schertl's text continued, for no perception can per se be described as true or wrong, as right or false, as real or illusory. Because of the revolutionary nature of these efforts at enlightenment, failure to sway the public was initially unimportant. We must not be despondent when concerned that the world is against us and the strongest spell remains ineffective, Schertl writes in the final passage underlined by Hitler. Our demon is struggling, and he is struggling in pain and hardship. We must suffer with him to share victory with him. During the NSDAP's wilderness years in the mid-1920s, this passage must have lent Hitler encouragement. Was Hitler's reading of Schertl an isolated occurrence, or does it reflect a pattern of interest in parapsychology that helps to explain the NSDAP's approach to politics? We know that Hitler read other works on mass psychology, including Gustave Le Bon's Psychology of Crowds. Le Bon based his theories on Théodule Ribot, who argued that a great mental disturbance, such as the French Revolution or First World War, could cause psychological dissolution and mass reversion to an earlier stage of evolution where human beings had less willpower and more impulsiveness. Le Bon subsequently theorized that civilized individuals can return to a savage state, similar to mass hypnosis, under certain circumstances. Those capable of manipulating the masses in this way, Le Bon argued, tended to be mentally abnormal, neurotic, combative, and charismatic, all traits generally ascribed to Hitler, and traits that Schertl describes positively as psychopathic. Hitler himself expressed a profound appreciation for magical thinking. In the late 1920s, according to Hermann Rauschning, Hitler discussed at some length the supposed fact that the magical forces of nature break through in man's dreams, though his culture has falsely sublimated them. Knowledge must once again take on the characteristics of a secret science. A new age of magic interpretation of the world is coming, Hitler reasoned, which would focus on the will and not intelligence. Hitler, George Mosse argues, may have kept his secret science to himself, or at most discussed it with his intimates. But we have every reason to believe that Hitler, impressed by his reading of Schertel and Le Bon, accepted the existence of a cult power that was capable of being channeled, controlled, and directed by man. This magical tradition, per Hitler, had very deep roots in the human past and was an essential part of political life because its primary purpose was to give human beings power. Numerous witnesses compared Hitler to a medium, magician, or medicine man who could, in the words of the Nazi Party leader Robert Lai, manipulate mystical forces which humans cannot avoid. In 1924, the astrologer Elsbeth Eberton observed that Hitler is only in his element when he has a crowd in front of him. On the platform, he is more like a medium, the unconscious tool of higher powers. The liberal journalist Rudolf Olden agreed. Hitler was a master magician for whom other Nazi leaders were merely lower-level mediums, middlemen of a power located in the Führer. Rauschning, too, would argue that Hitler was a medium whose genuinely demonic powers made men his instruments. Of the two kinds of dictators, the chieftain type and the medicine man type, Jung explained, Hitler is the latter. He is a medium. German policy was not made, Jung suggested, but revealed through Hitler. He is the mouthpiece of the gods as of old. Critics and supporters alike felt the same magical power in Hitler's presence. In Hitler's company, Rauschning recalls, I have again and again come under a spell which I was only later able to shake off, a sort of hypnosis. He was a medicine man who could take one back toward the savage state, the shaman's drum that beats round Hitler. Like a record in a groove, recalled Albrecht Haushofer, the son of Hitler's foreign policy advisor Karl Haushofer, Hitler could channel his remarkable energy. When he became absolutely exhausted, he just sat down once more a simple and nice man. Otto Strasser described Hitler as a clairvoyant who went into a trance when face to face with his public. That is his moment of real greatness, Strasser explained. Carried away by a mystic force, he cannot doubt the genuineness of his mission. Like a wireless receiving set, Hitler was able, with a certainty with which no conscious gift could endow him, to act as a loudspeaker, proclaiming the most secret desires, the least admissible instincts, the sufferings and personal revolts of a whole nation. Like any shaman or magician, the spoken word was essential to Hitler's magic, but it was not the rhetorical or political content of his speeches that mattered. Hitler's speeches were probably the greatest example of mass sorcery that the world has heard in modern times, Haydn observed. And yet it is hard to find in this stream of words even one or two that will live. Never in all his flights of rhetorical fire, Haydn conceded, did Hitler succeed in coining such a ringing phrase as cross of gold or blood, sweat, and tears. And yet great statesmen such as William Jennings Bryan and Winston Churchill were never as close to the masses as Hitler, who uttered entire paragraphs in which each sentence seemed to have the resonance and rhythm of an unforgettable composition. As Hitler wrote of his idol Karl Lueger, the power to bring together the great historical avalanches of religious and political nature has always been possible only through the magical power of the spoken word. Whoever eschews emotion and keeps their mouth closed will not be able to employ heaven as the proclaimer of his will. Hitler believed, like a magician delivering an incantation, that repeating the same message over and over would make it become reality. Haydn agreed that Hitler had an ability to simplify intricate ideas to certain phrases, repeated again and again by his propaganda mill without losing their banality. Hitler's powers of suggestion rendered the incoherent Nazi Party program moot. The NSDAP program, observed Olden, originated long after the movement and was given up long before the victory. The decisive factor is the influence of the Führer on the masses. Wise people might laugh at the idea that Hitler exercised powers of suggestion. Only what is suggestion? Olden continued. Why does the Democrat August Weber or liberal Eduard Dingeldey not succeed, but Adolf Hitler clearly does? It was because practical social and political matters that had to do with cause and effect became unnecessary. All that remained was the miraculous. Hitler was not a conventional politician or statesman, but a prophet regularly in a state of narcissistic conviction, which he attributes to his call to the salvation of his supporters. Olden wrote this in 1932. Just a year before the Nazi seizure of power. For the left wing of the Weimar government, for many liberals and for most foreign observers, the content of Hitler's speeches, his words, his gesticulations were laughable. For his magic to work, as Schertl and Le Bon suggested, Hitler needed a receptive audience whose members believe in its efficacy. Why did Hitler, whom most Germans seemed to worship, produce next to no impression on any foreigner? Jung asked rhetorically. It is because Hitler is the mirror of every German's unconscious, while he mirrors nothing from a non-German. There is such a force as the collective unconscious of a nation, Jung continued. Hitler had an uncanny power of being sensitive to that collective unconscious, as if he knows what the nation is really feeling at any given time. You can take 100 very intelligent men, Jung concluded, following Le Bon, but when you have them all together, they may be nothing more than a silly mob, susceptible to mass suggestion. Hitler's magical impact on his audience, at least his German audience, is well documented. In observing Hitler dozens of times, Haydn was less fascinated by Hitler than his audience. No matter how ridiculous his statements, Haydn recalled, the listeners sat rooted to their chairs with a blissful expression that had no connection whatever with the theme of the speech, but reflected instead the deep beatitude of a thoroughly muddled soul. Hitler was able to hear a voice, Jung added, which represented the collective unconscious of his own race. It is this fact that makes dealing with Hitler such a problem. He is virtually the nation. Ultimately, Hitler became the loudspeaker that magnifies the inaudible whispers of the German soul until they can be heard by the German's unconscious ear. His power was not political, it is magic. As Jung and Haydn suggest, Hitler benefited from a reservoir of Germans whose longing for harmony facilitated his ability to harness the raw power embodied in the frustrated masses. After the First World War, objective reality had for many Germans collapsed into a psychic disorder of apocalyptic proportions, which rendered millions of people susceptible to some higher power or charismatic messiah/guru, an idea, a movement, or an individual that elicited the conversion experience and the sense of liberation that comes with it. For those who are starving for the unattainable, who have been unsuccessful in the battle of life, National Socialism was the great worker of magic. By translating the religious mysteries of Nazism for the German people, Hitler became the master enchanter and the high priest, the nation's supreme magician. By exercising his magic on the desperate masses immersed in fantasies of civil war and apocalyptic imagery, Hitler was able to attract thousands of converts. According to many converts, Hitler's attraction seemed almost supernatural. As one witness reports, after hearing Hitler for the first time, instantly I came to a decision, and I said to myself that only this party can save Germany. Hitler's speech drew me to it, the NSDAP, so to speak, with magical power. Karl Lüdecke recalls after hearing Hitler that his critical faculty was swept away by the intense will of the man. The passion of his sincerity seemed to flow from him into me. I experienced an exaltation that could be likened only to a religious conversion. I felt sure that no one who had heard Hitler that afternoon could doubt that he was a man of destiny, the vitalizing force in the future of Germany. For another witness, the profound uncertainty and doubt he felt was dissipated in sudden revelation. It was for me as if he had spoken to me personally. I was a National Socialist, a joyful knowledge, a bright enthusiasm, a pure faith, Adolf Hitler and Germany. Even General Ludendorff, a man who had commanded millions, trembled with emotion when he first heard Hitler. If Hitler's magic manifested itself early on, it attracted relatively few followers during the first decade of the Weimar Republic. Before 1929, Hitler's powers of suggestion tended to be limited to those already receptive to Völkisch esoteric thinking: disillusioned nationalists, unemployed veterans, and other members of the traditional petty bourgeois right. It required more than magic for Hitler to be acknowledged Führer all over Germany. First, Hitler needed a strong enough party and propaganda apparatus to distill the lessons of Schertl and Le Bon for the masses. A decade of social and political crisis was equally necessary in catalyzing the conversion of Germans who didn't yet recognize Hitler or the NSDAP as the logical vehicle for their hopes and aspirations.